Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob Acquire. And today we're going to get into the 30-14 loss that the Panthers suffered this past Sunday against the Dallas Cowboys. It was at Bank of America Stadium. We were at home. First time we were favorites in well over a year. And we underperformed. There were mistakes on all three levels between offense, defense, and special teams. And that amounted to a loss. And it was almost reminiscent of what we saw prior to Bryce coming back off the bench. This was very reminiscent of the first 2 weeks of Bryce Young, the last couple of weeks we saw of Andy Dalton. And this team seems to be regressing, not taking a step forward.
Yeah, it was actually really reminiscent of last season, particularly in this stadium against that same team. And if you look at some of the numbers, it really backs that up. This was the most Bryce has been sacked this year, obviously 6 times. It's actually the second most in his career that he's been sacked. You know, the most, or like what team we were playing when he got sacked the most? It was the Cowboys last year when they sacked him 7 times when everybody was healthy. They didn't have DeMarcus Lawrence on this one. They didn't have Trayvon Diggs. He was like a surprise injury pop up near the end of the week, and he had to go have surgery. So he didn't make it to Charlotte, to North Carolina there. And we still got fried. The offensive line seemingly had no plan whatsoever for the Cowboys rush. It wasn't just Parsons, even though he had himself quite a day. It was everybody along that line. Taylor Moton gave up his first sack. Ike Ekwonu regressed to the Ike we saw in his first 2 seasons. And the interior of the offensive line just got fried, particularly Cade Mays, who I think played like a valiant role when he stepped into that starting center role. But the past couple of weeks, I don't think Cade Mays has been playing his best ball, so to speak, for this team. With the bad snaps versus Philly, when he didn't snap the ball right after the Leggett dropped touchdown pass where we had to take it to delay a game. And then this game where it was just woeful play, I think, throughout the entire game. And that led to Bryce having a very poor day. I don't want to say all of his bad stuff was on the O-line, but it was certainly a factor. Bryce Young, 4 turnovers on the day, really 3. And then the last one was like a whatever, we're just trying to make a play, throw it deep kind of thing. But still, bad performance from everyone all around, except for Jalen Coker, who had himself quite a day in his return following I think it was a quad injury he had, sat out a couple of weeks. But he had an 83-yard touchdown from Bryce Young. That's the longest touchdown pass since 2016 from Cam Newton to Ted Ginn. And it's the longest undrafted play to an undrafted receiver since Philly Brown. So good performance by him, but the rest of everything else just really fell flat in a game where I think most people, both of us included, the Panthers we expected them to take care of business and get this win as a momentum builder down the stretch.
Yeah. What's interesting from the Cowboys standpoint, they lost a lot this offseason. And like you said, this is the most sack Bryce has been since we played the Cowboys last year. And when you look back at that, and they lose guys like Dorrance Armstrong. And in this case, in this game in particular, it was Odigizua. Yeah, I was like, I know I'm pronouncing this wrong. Odigizua, I mean, just completely dominated, forced a couple fumbles, just a true nightmare in the middle of that defense. And then Overshown, he gets injured, I want to say a week ago. You think that's going to be kind of your avenue to target a player, and his replacement, a rookie, Maurice Liafu, wore number 35. He was the guy that caused the first fumble after Bryce Young made Micah Parsons miss on a sack attempt. And it's just those kind of contributions to these guys that were really needing to step up for the Cowboys this year. And so to finally see that development as you progress is good, regardless if Jerry Jones is going to stay with Mike McCarthy or move on with him this offseason. That's what you want to see from a roster and talent development. And unfortunately, we're not having that at this point. Like you said, Cade Mays wasn't playing all too well. Xavier Legette wasn't playing well up until his groin injury. The only guy on that offense that really balled out, like you said, was Jalen Coker. And then you go to the defensive side and you can't stop the run. And JC Horn in pivotal third down situations isn't shadowing their best wide receiver. I understand that the Carolina Panthers, from a schematic standpoint, play more zone on third and fourth down than they should than the NFL average. And in that case, it bites you in the butt. I mean, CeeDee Lamb pretty much won them a single drive where he converted every third down, caught the touchdown pass, and put them up early in the game. And then they were able to dictate the script from there. What did we talk about last Thursday? Dave Canales should hammer 12 personnel, bully the slight defensive front. Micah Parsons even said it after the game. They abandoned the run, and that's how you attack their weakness. And what do? They turn it around and use that same philosophy on us. They built a lead, and then they just got bigger and dominated. Rico Dowdle had himself a field day, amassing 149 yards on the ground. I mean, this is just textbook stuff. If they just understood principles of football and said, hey, you can't stop the run, we're going to do that. And Carolina didn't do that. They came out literally first drive in the second half. Bryce Young drops back the pass, fumble. Game's over by then at that point. Like, they drive down on a short field, score a touchdown. It's a 10-point game. And from there, that was it.
Yeah, and you talk about us not being able to stop the run. This is the third week in a row that we allow 200 or more rushing yards. 5 times this year we've done that, and then in 2 other games we allowed 198 and 197 respectively. So we knew that this run defense was bad, but so was the Cowboys. And you saw it on that first drive when it was a really methodical drive by the Panthers. We drive down. It's like a 6-minute drive. Chuba got a lot of touches. Jalen Coker and Thielen got touches on that drive, and then obviously, it ends with Bryce Young really with an incredible spin move on Micah Parsons, like froze him. And then as he's going to the ground, I think Maris Leofau, the guy you were talking about, punches Bryce in the arm, and that causes him to drop the ball. And the drive ends there. But then it was 10-0 the entire first half, basically, up until the long touchdown by Bryce Young to Coker. But we didn't run the ball at all then. Even throughout the first half, 10-0 is not a game that gets away from us. You saw it with one play. It got us right back in it after we forced a Cooper Rush fumble. So at that point, why not lean into the run? This team has been, I think, the culture that they're trying to develop, because they talk about building culture, building an identity. I think with the investment in the running back room, and yes, I know Jonathan Brooks is hurt. I know Miles Sanders is hurt, but you have a lot of guys on the practice squad. They brought in a couple of guys this week that they signed off other practice squads. The identity is the run game, or they're trying to build off of it. They signed the 2 hog mollies in the trenches in this offseason, but Dave Canales often leans away from it in it's not even in key moments when he should be running the ball. It's in common sense moments that we lean away from it. And that's the frustrating thing to me. It's both Dave Canales, and Ejiro Evero, our defensive coordinator, I think got thoroughly outcoached in this game by veteran coaches in Mike McCarthy and Mike Zimmer, who, by the way, are not good coaches whatsoever this season. Both of their units are lagging behind, but in this game, they were far more prepared. They had the perfect plan for it. And it seems like the Panthers couldn't respond.
No, there was no response to what the Dallas Cowboys were doing. Whatever they wanted to do, they seemed like they could get. And that showed itself on Sunday. I think what was interesting is that Bryce Young, because you went away from the run very early in this game, Bryce Young trying to force it into Adam Thielen in a critical situation ends up getting a ball intercepted, where Greg Olson on the broadcast did a great job of showing that he needs to keep scanning the field on the reads, and he would have seen on the outside. I don't know if it was David Moore, but somebody was pretty much, it was 3 slants or 3 in breakers. Yeah, Sanders. It was a tight end. And that it's exactly, you have to read to that next guy. And Bryce Young got caught up in the moment. He got caught up in pretty much this entire game. I mean, 4 turnovers is a lot, and that is a big reason why they lost. And I mean, if you take away those two plays that we've kind of alluded to, that you've even talked on, the Cooper Rush fumble and then right after the Jalen 3-yard touchdown, that was a 11.38 swing and expected points at it. I mean, that was a huge change in momentum because they were in field goal range. At that point, they could go up 13-0. And that is a bigger deficit when you can cut that down to 10-7 going into the half and you get the ball coming out of halftime. I mean, that was such a huge moment in that game. And if you take that away, this performance ranks almost like 12th since 2011 in worst performances. So those two plays are the only thing holding this back from being an all-time just like worst like game from this team. And we've seen a lot of those this year. And it's at some point, something's got to give. I know a lot of people after this game are calling for Evero's head as kind of like a defensive coordinator. I don't know if that's the switch that needs to be made. I don't know if there needs to be a lot of a talent address to that side. There's still holes on the offense that you have to fix. And it just becomes a whole nother nightmare going into this next offseason, just based on how this game played out. And I'm hoping this was a blip in the map and that the next couple games we get back to the kind of football that we saw the past few weeks coming out of the bye against Kansas City, against Tampa Bay, against Philadelphia. Because if the games start looking like they did against the Dallas Cowboys the rest of the way out, this is going to be a long, long offseason.
Yeah, and that's the scariest part, so to speak, to me. This was a game in which, again, we were favored by Las Vegas, by the betting corporations. We had the advantage in this game, and for it to look like that, for us to almost get put on the map of the, I think it's top 30 worst that you have, that the graphic you have.
Yeah.
I thought we got away from that once Bryce had come back, but it reared its ugly head again, and I think it showed that while we had this idea, we were in these games versus these top seeds in their respective divisions, the Chiefs, the Buccaneers now, and then the Eagles. We were in these games. We could have won in the fourth quarter, but the defense let us down at the end, or a Chuba Hubbard fumble at the end, Xavier Legette drop at the end. But we were right there. I think this game like kind of showed us, I mean, as a fan base, that we're still multiple steps away from realistically contending with teams like that. Like the Eagles definitely played down to us. I can't remember a time that they scored. They had 17, right? And it's 17-16. I can't remember or something like that. I don't remember when they scored that few points. It was 16-13 is what it was. Yeah, I'm like lost in my head here. Like Tampa Bay, Baker, quite frankly, played horrendous even before his ankle got injured. So like they kind of played down there. And then the Chiefs game, I felt like they really took their foot off the gas in the second half there. But all this to say, like there have to be changes made. There has to be a talent infusion. You talked about maybe Evero being a bit like his time might be coming for the Panthers. I think the way he does stuff, particularly with JC Horn, is quite a detriment to the defense in terms of not letting him shadow opposing receivers. We've seen this all year, right? Like where Mike Evans was against Mike Jackson, that didn't work out well. I can think of like a ton of other ones. DeAndre Hopkins, Jamar Chase in the Bengals game when they actually had JC Horn on T. Higgins for most of that game, but that leaves Jamar Chase open, and he had one of those 80-yarders that he has. It seems like an issue for me. And I saw a lot of actual beat reporters remarking that on the Twitter timeline during the game. And it's when you have the people who report on the team kind of mentioning it and how it's a problem, I think it becomes an even bigger problem than one that just the fan base kind of brings up. And I don't know, like, yes, we don't have the talent overall and the defensive secondary, I guess, to support the rest of the field in coverage, but I don't know. I think you have to have your best player shadowing their best player, especially when he's the one who's making the most damage happen in their passing game. Now, granted, there were two other receivers that scored. Jonathan Mingo was not among them. But yeah, shout out Mingo revenge game. I'm not sure he had a target in this one, but still, the CeeDee Lamb stuff was pretty horrible to watch, especially when it's Xavier Woods and Fuller matched up on him, and they just don't stand a chance.
Well, I think what's interesting is when you look at where Cooper Rush was throwing the ball, and I haven't watched enough Cooper Rush film, haven't pulled up the stats to see if he has an issue throwing to the left side of the field, but all three of those touchdowns came on the right side of the field. if you're trying to use JC Horn like a Richard Sherman in a zone scheme where he is in essence taking away a third of the field, would it not make sense to put him on the side that Cooper Rush has a lot of success throwing towards? So maybe coming into the day, he was a pretty balanced guy in terms of throwing to both sides. But if you're seeing early success often, especially with that CeeDee Lamb touchdown, Horn should have been on that right side, and he wasn't. So again, in-game adjustments, not putting your best player on their best player, and letting things shake out from there is just a detriment. And I can understand why he's not only just a scapegoat in this instance, he's part of the problem.
Yeah, and I know the 3-4, the 34 or odd front, whatever you want to call it. I know fans have issue with that, and as do I when you don't have a nose tackle. But it's just more than that. It's stuff like the JC Horn decision. I don't know, like I don't know what the solution is with the current scheme, like with the group of players and the current scheme. It's not going to change, especially when we keep getting injuries to key positions like linebacker. Trevin Wallace didn't play in this one, so Claude and Cherilus had to play. He suffered a season-ending toe injury. So, like, obviously, injuries are playing a part in this, but every team in the NFL deals with sustained injuries throughout the season. Look at the Detroit Lions, and I'm not saying we're the Lions or anything, but they've lost like 11 not starter caliber, but starters or the people who are backing them up, starter level players on that defense alone. But they're still making stuff happen with Aaron Glenn. He knows how to use the pieces that he has. I'm not sure Ejiro Evero is on that level, so to speak, but having the defense perform like this week in and week out just doesn't make it any easier to watch as a fan.
No, and there's probably going to be a change in the offseason towards that. Hopefully, you're able to bring in a guy like Mason Graham or Abdul Carter to help boost that defensive line and really help fix that defense and reshape it into the best way possible, whether that is a 4-3 front or a 3-4 odd. It's just going to depend on exactly like you said, what the personnel is going to look like in the offseason and the decision at who's going to be the defensive coordinator ultimately, because that will dictate a lot of what that scheme looks like. So I think this is a good way to segue away from the Panthers. We'll definitely get more into them when we talk about the Cardinals matchup on Thursday. And their defense definitely is suspect. And since it is a road game for them, there is an opportunity to play upset to a better team in the NFC. We'll kind of break that down in a couple of days. But for now, what we want to get into is some Twitter beef that has been popping off today. Actually, the past couple of weeks, I will say, in regards to some of the content that I have put out and the response by Bears fans. And I think the best way to describe this, and it's poor because like I want to understand from the fan standpoint. When I saw Cam Newton struggle early and often, I wanted to find places to put the blame. I watched his wide receivers drop balls, his kicker miss field goals, his defense not stop the opposing team. There were other conflicting factors as to why he wasn't as successful. But I think when you look at some of the quarterbacks that we have today and just the putrid production, that at some point, I know we want to go, it's the head coach's fault. It's the play caller's fault. It's the O-line. It's the wide receivers around them. I think at a certain point, you have to understand that the quarterback still sucks. And if the situation gets better, which that's hard for the Chicago Bears, I'm going to say it's really, really hard for the Bears situation to get any better next offseason. They have a good defense, they have a good offensive line, and they have very viable pass catchers, and they haven't gotten it done. So I understand scheme can make it easier, but this is where I want to open up the floor to you and just go at what point is the blame on the Bears season go on Caleb Williams' shoulders when you look at how well Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and Bo Nix have played in their respective spots throughout the NFL?
Well, and you're just preaching to the choir with trying to defend QBs. Look no further than last year with the Panthers. You went all the way back to 2011 with Cam. I was fighting for my life trying to defend Bryce Young from people because obviously he's not 6'5", 250 like Cam. He's 5'11", 205 pounds. So his slight frame makes him a bit of an easier target. But then when you look at how bad the Panthers O-line was last year, how bad the receivers are, the receivers are still pretty bad. But when you bring in a new head coach and you get him situated, like after the benching and everything, he has improved. He looks like he can be a starter in this league, led the team to competitive games and wins there. So, like, I can understand that if you change some things and go forward, even in an organization as dysfunctional as the Panthers, Bryce Young has been able to pull himself out of it and make himself into a starter going forward. In regards to the Bears, who I don't think are as dysfunctional as the David Tepper Panthers are. I think we're right up there, to be quite frank, with the Jets, and maybe even the like the 2000s Browns. Like, we're right there until proven otherwise, as far as organization goes there. But then, yeah, you bring it up. Their O-line, while it may not have the names on it and they might be underperforming relative to expectation, their O-line is at least league average. I know Ben Baldwin puts out every week composite pass blocking rankings, and the Bears rank like somewhere between like 10 and 14 to 15 every single week. The O-line isn't as bad as we think it is. The pass catchers, we know how good DJ Moore is. He actually thrived quite a bit last season with Justin Fields and Tyson Bagent at QB, and then they bring in Keenan Allen, who had a career year last year, and Roma Dunze, a top 10 receiver pick. That was their pick. Caleb Williams was courtesy of us. And then they bring in Gerald Everett. They signed DeAndre Swift. So I think they have the players in place. I think the O-line is more than viable, especially when you look at O-lines like the Texans this year, how bad that is with Stroud. And we see Stroud struggle there, but we saw what he was able to do with a good O-line. We saw the Panthers O-line this year when it's better, how Bryce is able to perform. So when you see O-lines that aren't horrible, some of these young guys can perform. Even in New England, their O-line isn't great, but Drake May's performing. Washington's isn't great, but Jaden Daniels is performing. He's still probably the leader for Rookie of the Year. Bo Nix might be creeping up there. And I think Denver's O-line is quite solid, and they have everybody under contract for quite a while because they just extended Garrett Bowles.
Who's Bo Nix throwing the ball to compared to Caleb Williams?
Yeah, I'm talking O-line, but yeah, then you get to that part when exactly Caleb Williams has at least a wide receiver 1 in DJ Moore, a high-end receiver 2, I think, in Keenan Allen, and a guy that you can play for the future in Roma Dunze, and good ancillary supporting cast, DeAndre Swift, Cole Kmet, that kind of thing. When you take all of that into account, I think you couldn't be more correct. At some point, we do have to address some of the blame onto Caleb Williams. Now, yes, Shane Waldron, I don't think was the best of coordinators. I also don't think Thomas Brown or whoever currently calls their plays, because Thomas Brown is their interim head coach, I don't think they're the best of coordinators either. But I think that there are, how do I put it? I think there are viable answers that Caleb Williams has not found in that offense. And the last point I'll make before I open it back up to you, we talk about how Caleb Williams was supposed to be this immediate improvement and everything was set up for him. Well, last year, the Bears were 7-10. The Bears would have to win out this year to get there, and they're playing the Lions, the Seahawks, and the Packers again. I don't see that. And last year, they scored over 21 points per game, 21.2. This year, it's down to 19. So even with all the upgrades in place, it's not materializing for the offense.
No, it hasn't. And exactly like you said, this offseason, hey, let's build around this young potential superstar quarterback that we're taking with the first overall pick. We already have DJ Moore. We just drafted Darnell Wright. We have some pieces in place in the offense. Is it great? No, not really, but it's good. It's serviceable. Let's go get you Keenan Allen, another reliable target on third down that you can get the ball to. He's been open this year. Guess
he had quite the game last night too.
And there was an in-breaking route he had that Caleb Williams just throws it way out in front of him. And then there's another 3rd and 2 situation where Caleb Williams has a guy come wide open in front of him. Like, there is like 5 yards of green grass between, like, there's like 4 defenders kind of in it, and he's in the middle of the square, and it's just wide open. It's an easy pitch and catch. And instead he holds the ball. He tries to scramble a little bit, has another guy come open, fails to hit him there. And I think it's either an incompletion or he takes a sack. And then you go to 4th down and you're punting the ball. Again, it's just situational football, playing smart, sound, fundamental football. It's not necessarily all that hard. He's just not quick and decisive. The biggest difference when you look at Shane Waldron and Thomas Brown's offense, Shane Waldron had guys come open on slants and other different route concepts on those first reads to make it easier. Caleb Williams would just hesitate, go to a second and third read, panic, scramble, and then he would either take a bad sack or make a bad play. And that stuff piles up. It adds up. So what does Thomas Brown do when he becomes the play caller? He's like, okay, we're going to give you the short game, screens, try to get the ball out as fast as possible, not have you rely on that read progression that Shane Waldron was trying to get you into. And that hasn't worked. Like, yes, the efficiency has gone up a little bit, but when you just pointed out the points, this is a team that the past 3 straight games, they have been shut out in the first half. They get all their momentum and points in the second half when they're down 2 or 3 scores already. This isn't a competitive game. You have to claw back to send a game to overtime or get into a position where you can send the game into overtime. And it's just, that's not how you're going to play winning football in the NFL. And it's backfired on them. I don't know where they're going to go from this. There's no guarantee that you bring in a Ben Johnson, a Cliff Kingsbury, an offensive mind, that's just going to fix this offense with a quarterback that struggles to throw accurately. Like, yes, we saw it in college that he could attack intermediate and short levels, but there was a question about his deep ball, and his deep ball this year is the worst in the NFL. Like, it's just, there's no coming back from this in terms of you have all this talent and you have squandered every single bit of it.
Yeah, and you bring up just him, I think, not seeing the field, right? It kind of reminds me a little bit of Bryce from last year, but I think Bryce found stuff. It's just it didn't either get there on time or in rhythm, or the receivers would just drop it because they were like practice squad receivers or receivers, again, Jonathan Mingo, that aren't performing super, super well on their new teams, Deontay Johnson, DJ Chark. But then some of the things that I saw you were putting out over the past couple of days, because I know you do weekly content with FTN's data. It's always excellent visuals. But one that always sticks out to me is create rate and missed yardage. And the missed yardage one I saw pop up on my timeline recently, that's going over top 10 in total missed yards. These are just missed yards by the QB. They missed the throw. Just flat out, that's what it is. They don't see it. They miss it short. It's over them, what have you. There were quite a few of those like you were talking about in the game last night. Caleb Williams is 3rd overall currently. And people you have up there are like really high volume passers. CJ Stroud also not having a great year, right? Josh Allen, who throws a lot of his stuff down the field. I excuse a lot of those misses because he's also the leader for the MVP right now, and he's the driving force for his offense. Patrick Mahomes.
And if you compare his pressure ratio and Mahomes, the next guy that you're about to talk to, with Caleb Williams, it's night and day. There are
right.
other things that those quarterbacks are doing besides missing that are helping their team.
Oh, and like create rate is one of them too. Both of those guys are perennially in the top right quadrant. That's where you want to be usually on graphs of this kind of measure. And Caleb Williams just underperforms in those. And yes, he is a rookie, but I think he had a lot laid out in front of him when he came into the league compared to other guys like Drake May, like Jaden Daniels, like Bo Nix, who aren't performing as poorly as Williams is in their situations. And I think the point that you're trying to make here is right. At some point, because he's a rookie, we want to excuse it because, and I say we as mainly a Bears fan base, because I went through this last year. I didn't want to blame Bryce, and I'm sure they don't want to blame Caleb for a lot of the stuff. But if I think Caleb Williams were performing to the expectation that everyone, and I say everyone because NFL media gassed him up, they were calling him the best prospect, better than Trevor Lawrence since Andrew Luck. If he had performed to that level of expectation, Shane Waldron would still be the OC. Matt Eberflus maybe would still be the head coach. I don't know if he's ever going to escape that overtime, or excuse me, that timeout fumble there. I don't know if any head coach is escaping that. But if he were playing at the level, let's say Bo Nix is, certainly the coaching staff is still in place, and all those moves in the offseason look good. But he isn't. That's the reality of this. And you talk about where do you go from here? I think that's a relevant question because DJ Moore got extended, I think, week 3 or 4 into the season, early in the season. So he's there for the long haul. Odunze is certainly there for the long haul. I think Keenan Allen's a free agent coming up. But they have a lot of O-line pieces in place. What are they going to do with their money, which is not as their pockets are not as deep as they were last free agency. And what are they going to do with that draft pick come April? Yeah, the end of April, because they're going to have another top 10 pick if this continues to play out. And like we talked about last week, I don't think they're going to win any of their remaining games because it's such a hard schedule.
Yeah, I don't know if the answer is with just how. And I know Luther Burton, and we talked about him last
Mhm.
week, is probably closer to a DJ Moore type guy where you can put him all over the field. He's going to play physical at the catch point, going to get you yak, explosive player in his own right. But when you're going to lose Keenan Allen, is the idea to replace that production there? There's going to be a couple elite offensive tackle prospects. Do you try to bolster this offensive line and fix this offensive line issue that Bears fans are clamoring about? Will the new head coach and the play caller learn how to play to his strengths, get him to play more comfortably, make more accurate throws in those intermediate ranges that he's not doing this rookie year? And I don't know if that is a testament to coaching or he just never had it to begin with. And that could be the case. We've seen busts happen before, but this kind of level of production, when you look at first overall picks from 2011 till 2024, there have only been 4 quarterbacks with a negative expected points added by the end of the year. 3 of those 4 quarterbacks have been drafted since 2021. So Trevor Lawrence, Bryce Young, Caleb Williams, all under 0. The only other quarterback that got taken first overall and had a piss poor performance his rookie year was Jared Goff. And everybody thinks of him as this game manager. He's not a guy that can do it. I mean, you look at some of the check down and screen rates that seems to support the idea that Ben Johnson has him insulated in Detroit. Sean McVay doing the same thing in LA. So when you put him in that respect, he doesn't seem like the generational talent or prospect, like you're saying, that scouts were touting him, that him and Lawrence were the best since Andrew Luck. Like, no, they aren't on Andrew Luck's level, and they should never even be mentioned with him probably for the rest of their careers.
And the other thing you bring up, I'm looking at your graphic, the one you're alluding to right here. A lot of those QBs, actually most of them, went to the team that had the number that like earned the number 1
Went
pick.
2 and 14,
Yeah,
went
yeah.
1 and 15. We're
Very bad
shit.
teams. Like there'll be ones like Andrew Luck, I think, came into a favorable situation with injury, like following the injury and everything. But that's about it. Jared Goff came into a bad team. The next year he got McVay, and then he really put it together. I think to Goff's credit, he's more than serviceable now for the Detroit Lions. Bryce Young came into a horrible situation. They traded away DJ Moore, had one of the worst O-lines in the league. To their pass catchers, to that effect, they were 32nd in yards after the catch last year. 31st this year. We haven't really improved in that department, but that was a horrible situation for Bryce Young. Trevor Lawrence, Urban Meyer. Do I need to say anything else there? That team was so bad that they got the first overall pick again the following year. The Buccaneers in 2015 with Jameis were not good. The Cardinals for Kyler were not good. The Bengals for Joe Burrow weren't good. He tore his ACL his rookie year, and then you saw how bad they continued to be. Got even worse after that. The talk about the Cam Newton Panthers. The team was horrible the year before, and then he comes in, and granted they only won 6 games, but they are much, much better on offense. I don't think I left. Baker. Talk about the Browns, another team that got the first overall pick in consecutive years. They lost every single game before leading up to Baker. Like, these are generationally
and
horrible places here. But then Chicago.
To go on the Baker tangent just for a second before we get to Chicago, what's interesting is a lot of people were like, "Oh, well, out of those quarterbacks, who had their head coach fired?" Baker did. Halfway through his rookie year, Hugh Jackson gets canned, and
Urban
he
got fired too. Frank Reich got fired too.
But those rookies were kind of in Caleb Williams' tier in terms of
performance.
It was a question of like, if the head coach got fired, did his production go up? Like, yeah, Baker Mayfield proved he could do it with the Cleveland Browns. Like you said, they went 0-16.
Who, by the way, after trading for Watson, their quarterback struggles are continuing to go. They're still, the famous jersey they have of like 78 QB names. That's still going to be filled out. Baker's found himself a nice spot after he left the team. But yeah, all of those teams, most of them were either horrible or generationally horrible. And then the Bears had the 9th overall pick last year. That's the pick they earned, going 7-10, and they get gifted a Scott Fitterer, nice hand packaged first overall pick to them. And it's a good, I think by all accounts, I like, there's going to be revisionist history because of how it is now and how bad their offense is now. But coming into the year, most people said this is one of, if not the best situations ever for a
Okay, so
rookie QB.
we've seen 4 rookie quarterbacks play. JJ McCarthy, obviously, he's been injured since the offseason with his ACL tear. Michael Penix may or may not play. We'll see what play comes.
Hopefully,
to play
for the Falcons' sake, he plays, because Kirk, yikes.
And his pressure to sack ratio was really good in college. So I think if, as long as he's not missing guys and he's playing in time, in rhythm with that system, the Falcons offense might actually go up in production compared to Kirk Cousins at the helm. But I want to go back to those preseason ratings, like you said, because recency bias is going to drive it that this is a bad team. They weren't that great, blah, blah, blah. They had a top 10 begin with. They were starting over with a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback. But Chicago's win total was set at 8.5 in the preseason. 3 other teams, like I said, took a quarterback that have started for most of the year. Washington picked at 2. Their win total was set at 6.5. Denver, that picked Bo Nix just outside of the top 10. Their win total was set at 5.5. New England, who took Drake May at 3, their win total was at 4.5. And while they've kind of hit market expectations, Drake May has looked the part. He looks like a guy that you can build the future of that team around that is devoid of talent. But the fact that the Broncos and the Commanders, who were thought to be like an afterthought with these rookie quarterbacks and going to have struggles throughout this year, have performed excellently, are in the playoffs, so to speak, are going to probably have a wild card spot, and could maybe put up a fight that first round. And that's what you want to see. And unfortunately, that's what the Bears didn't get with Caleb Williams.
Yeah, Washington and Denver. I certainly, if I'm the 2 seed, don't want to, in the AFC at least, I don't want to play Denver just because their defense and what their offense can do with Sean Payton and Bo Nix. Although their offense sputtered a little bit this past week versus the Colts, but thankfully they were playing the Colts and they gifted them a couple scores there. Talking about the Adonai Mitchell pick 6, probably that's like the MVP of the play of the year. Like Shaqtin' a Fool, worst play of the year, probably goes to that one. But joking aside from the QB perspective, I think not just Bears fans, but everybody in NFL media, us included, have to come to the terms with part of the reason they are failing is Caleb. And this doesn't mean he's going to be a bust forever. Like we've seen Bryce Young be able to turn it up a little bit. Anthony Richardson, while he was quite bad this past week, I thought has responded well to his benching overall. There is like a path forward for Caleb, and he has the stuff in place around him to get better. But you brought up Ben Johnson or Cliff Kingsbury or whoever the next head coach is going to be. I don't know if they're going to be the guys to go to the Bears. Like if I'm Ben Johnson and New England comes open, I would much rather go there. If for whatever reason Zach Taylor doesn't make it, I would much rather go to Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Like Ben Johnson's going to be the cream of the crop. He's going to have whatever pick he wants. And if the dysfunction with the Bears team permeates and is visible to prospective interviewees for head coach, not sure he's going to be the guy that wants to end up going to a team like that. I think a sleeper, I guess if we want to do a premature perfect take for the offseason for head coaches, I think Joe Brady's a sleeper for a job like that because he's performing quite well with Buffalo. But yeah, the future of the Bears certainly is in question. And I don't think Caleb Williams' play has warranted an overall positive outlook for that offense. I guess that's a good way to wrap up my take on the Bears offense currently, as there's been some Twitter beef with you and some people replying over the past couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, they want to talk about context that the head coach is fired. They're on their 3rd offensive coordinator. That's the organizational dysfunction is what they want to draw the attention to. But it's like you have the talent on the roster. The market believes it. You see it on the field. It's just not coming together. And the glue that's supposed to kind of pull everything together on offense is the quarterback. You have a play you're supposed to execute, and he's not executing those plays. So with that, I think this is a perfect time to get into perfect takes as we wrap up this episode. Mine is going to be very much related to this. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, yeah, I can't speak. If you guys pay attention to the screen that I'm sharing here, Caleb Williams is on the trajectory to follow a Jamarcus Russell. And out of the quarterbacks, for those of you who follow me on Twitter that have been taken with the first overall pick and been in the situation that they were, he has arguably been in the best situation, and his performance is trending to that of Jamarcus Russell. So going back to perfect takes, my take is he is the worst bust at the first overall pick selected since Jamarcus Russell. Like I think hands down that is what we're seeing, that Caleb Williams is not the guy that we thought he was. He danced around too much in college, tried to make all this magic work. It works in the Pac-12, doesn't work in the NFL. And I think he's starting to realize that.
Well, first off, let me do a quick rest in peace to the Pac-12. Greed in college football has destroyed what was once a great conference. They'll say that they're the conference of champions because they'll include stuff like, I'm not going to demean other sports in relation to football. They have a lot of conference and national champions in the former Pac-12. Now it's simply the Pac-2 with Washington State and Oregon State. I'm not certain, or I'm not necessarily on the same path as him being as big a bust as Jamarcus Russell. We know that Russell didn't have the work ethic that it took to be at the NFL level, and I don't think there's anything implicative of Caleb Williams having a lack of work ethic at the same level. However, when you show that graph you showed and the ELO is trending that way, I think you could look at his EPA, like his cumulative EPA, and see that it's going down. After starting the year when he performed quite well versus teams like the Panthers and the Jags, it looked like there was a trend upward. But since the Bears, I believe they've lost 8 straight, is if that's correct, let me look on. Yeah, 8 straight, third longest loss streak in the NFL. It's certainly trending that Caleb Williams isn't going to perform at the expectation. But then again, we saw a better turnaround with Bryce this year. Anthony Richardson has looked a little bit better than he did to start last year. So certainly it isn't the end for him. But yeah, for now, it is not looking great for Caleb Williams. On a more positive take, I guess, in my court here, Jalen Coker had a really good game versus the Cowboys. I know we started the pod with the Cowboys game, and we're going to end it with Jalen Coker as well. I think Jalen Coker is going to pass Xavier Legette to become the Panthers' leading receiver this season. Legette is currently the leader. It's at 437 yards. And while Coker did miss some time, and he obviously didn't start the year on the team because he didn't make the 53 and was on the practice squad, when he's on the field with Bryce, they do have a connection. And Xavier Legette has a groin injury. He's already set to, or we're expecting him to miss this week against Arizona. And going forward, Dave Canales described him as week to week. So I think if it's on the more serious side, they're probably going to shut Legette down for the season. He also has to have wrist surgery. I believe it's on his left hand because of a flare-up from an old college injury. So I could see Jalen Coker really getting the volume that Legette was getting and taking the reins and becoming the Panthers' leading scorer. We saw the burners he does have. I know he slipped in the draft because of his 40, but just like Cooper Kupp, maybe the on-field speed matters a bit more. So I think he's going to be the leading receiver for the in terms of yardage for the Panthers this season when it's all said and done.
I like that take, and I agree with you. There's a lot of people that play a lot faster on the field. The game speed is a lot better than some track timing, because that's in essence
the underwear Olympics at the combine.
It is. You aren't in pads. You aren't trying to make a guy miss. You don't have a helmet on where you can disorient somebody and know kind of where your field of vision is. There's a lot that goes into this at that level. And Jalen Coker at Holy Cross, he was a football player. And he kind of got disrespected because of obviously the competition he faced at the college level. But then some of those tracking numbers, it was a turnoff for several front offices. And I'm glad the Panthers took a flyer on him because he's arguably the best wide receiver on this team. He's probably got the highest upside. And that's saying a lot since we drafted Xavier Legette with our first round pick at pick number 32. so that he could develop into this DK Metcalf, AJ Brown type of wide receiver.
For sure. Maybe the possibly the greatest undrafted receiver in Adam Thielen can be the perfect mentor for the next greatest undrafted receiver, at least in the Panthers history books, in Jalen Coker. I think that's going to do it for us for this episode of Perfect Takes. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast content. Like Steven mentioned, on Thursday, we'll be back to preview the Cardinals game. Hopefully that goes better. And to talk about the next position of need for the draft. I think it's quite obvious looking at what Rico Dowdle did to us. Hint, hint. But we'll talk more about people who can stop the run on Thursday. But until then, keep pounding.